Hi, I'm Chelsea, the Christian nutritionist. Welcome to the Christian Health Club podcast. We are here to fire you up in spirit, mind, and body so that you can get out into the world and be everything God created you to be. Welcome to the club. Here we go. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the club. How are you today? We are diving into one of my favorite topics, fasting, and specifically a fasting strategy called the protein-sparing modified fast. This is something that I have been wanting to explore on the podcast for a long time, but was recently inspired when I heard Dr. David Jockers talking about it. Dr. Jockers is a fasting expert, the author of The Fasting Transformation, and someone I've admired for years in this holistic health space because he boldly weaves his faith into his work and has been such an inspiration to me especially as I was starting out and feeling that call from God to be a Christian health practitioner. So honored to have him here with us today to unpack this topic and share his wisdom. Welcome, Dr. David Jockers, to the Christian Health Club podcast.
Well, thanks so much, Chelsea. I love what you're doing, and I love how you're doing it all for the glory of God. So you have a great message and a great voice.
Well, thank you so much for that. It's people like you and Dr. Axe who really just kind of help pave that way and be that example. So I do really appreciate that as well. Let's start by just having you share what initially led you to the holistic health space.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a God story, just like probably most of us. But growing up, my mom actually was studying to become a massage therapist. She became a midwife. She became a naturopath. Later on, as I was basically a teenager and kind of moving out of the house at that point. But she was always into holistic health. She always had a garden. I mean, she was a crunchy mom before that became popular, right? So in the early 90s, we were on a macrobiotic diet. Wow. My dad's like the complete opposite, most picky eater I know. And he rebelled, against it. And so did we as kids. I was one of 6 kids. But my mom was just really, she was just dedicated. And so she taught me how food impacts my skin. My older brother had acne. I didn't want to have acne. So she was like, that's because he's eating processed sugar. He's eating these processed chocolate bars. So I realized, okay, food is going to impact my appearance. And also I was an athlete growing up. And so she would say, you need to eat, she would make like steamed kale. If you know anything about the macrobiotic diet, it's like the most bland diet. But at that period of time in her research in the early 90s, it was like the most popular thing. And so she thought, she doesn't teach that now, but she thought that was good. And so, we had like pea soup and tofu and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm like, why do I have to eat this? And she would tell me, you got to eat your kale because that's actually going to help you have more energy. Your bones are going to be stronger, right? This is going to help prevent injuries, and so she would just go into performance. And as an athlete, very competitive person, I was like, whatever I've got to do, I'll eat more kale then. I'll eat whatever it takes to perform better. And so I just learned that what I put in my body impact. She would, whenever everybody would get sick, she'd make like a big thing of chicken soup. She'd have us eating cloves of garlic. So I just learned growing up that the food I put in my body impacts my performance and how I show up in life. And so later on, when my sports career was over and I was in college, I became a personal trainer because I was into fitness. I was training for sports. And so that just was natural to me. It came down to my activities impact my physical performance, my mental performance. I realized working out regularly impacted. I felt better. I had, obviously better mood. Was able to think sharper and clearer. And so I became a trainer. And then, eventually I got into sports nutrition, along those routes as well. And then I had some health issues. I had irritable bowel syndrome in my early 20s. And that actually led me into chiropractic school because I had irritable bowel pretty bad. Actually, I was a personal trainer and I was eating 6 meals a day and eating healthier than anybody I knew, but it wasn't real healthy foods. It was, lots of bad protein powders and protein bars. And not that, you can make some of these things better, but back then I didn't know any better. And, I have to have a huge breakfast in the morning when I woke up. I'd have to have a protein shake before I went to bed. I thought I had to do all those things to maintain my weight because I've always been naturally thin and I was trying to put on as much muscle as I could. And so I thought I had to do that or I'd waste away. And I wasn't sleeping well, like most people in their, late teens, early 20s. I was working a lot. I was in school. And, with all that said, it all, kind of hit the fan. I had irritable bowel syndrome and lost about 30 pounds, even though I was still trying to eat and still trying to work out. And that's when I came across a book, and it was The No Grain Diet by Dr. Joe Mercola. And I think it was like 2004. And I read that book, and there were chiropractors at my gym that I was a trainer at, and they just seemed to love what they were doing, and they were into holistic health and nutrition. And so I thought, that I want to do that. And so anyways, went to chiropractic school and just learned about how the body was created to heal itself, right? It doesn't need any help, just no interference. Chiropractic's focused around removing interference from the spine, from the nervous system, right? Because we have the brain and spinal cord travel through the spine. And so remove the interference and allow the body to heal itself. And so I was a chiropractor for years, but I was really into just teaching community health. And so I opened my clinic in 2009. And, was really just passionate about teaching people how to be healthy and well and a holistic lifestyle. And I started also creating a lot of online health content. And eventually that took a life of its own. Eventually I sold my clinic after I had hired doctors to really run and operate it. And, I just, at this point, just create online health content, really helping people remove the interferences that are blocking their body's own natural ability to heal. And helping empower people to live out their God-given potential. And so, that's really how God brought me into it through my own health struggles and really just kind of the philosophy that my mom gave me growing up. And so I would credit it to my mom and to the Lord's leading.
Yeah. Well, that's how a lot of us get here too, is just, coming up against brick walls and the conventional medical system and just not knowing what to do and finding these holistic options, and then just starts making you think. And I'm with you. The reason I do what I do is just to help people feel better. I feel like when you feel well, you serve well, you live better into your God-given potential and all He's called you to be. So I absolutely appreciate that. Let's talk about fasting. When did fasting kind of enter your world and start becoming part of what you did as a health practice?
Yeah, for sure. Because I was doing anything but fasting. I thought fasting was the worst thing ever. And I kind of skipped this part, but, I picked up that book, The No Grain Diet. And I started basically, and this is before the term quote unquote paleo diet was around, but I started focusing on, I realized I needed to make changes. And so I started focusing on clean, healthy meats, fruits, and vegetables. And as I did that, I noticed that I just wasn't as hungry between meals. I had natural satiation. And that's what happens when you're on a high protein. You get rid of the processed foods. When you're on a real food diet it's high in protein, healthy fats, and then you get fiber from the colorful fruits and vegetables. And that'll help stabilize your blood sugar, helps reduce cravings. And so I just noticed that I wasn't as hungry. I didn't feel the need to constantly be eating all throughout the day. And I was also busy. I was in graduate school, and sometimes I would have 7 a.m. classes and things like that. And I actually noticed that I felt better. I felt my best when I was drinking a lot of water in the morning. And that actually, because it would fill my stomach, it turned off hunger. So it suppressed my hunger hormone. We all have this hormone in our stomach that's released called ghrelin when the stomach is empty. And so hydrating distended the stomach, my stomach, and inhibited ghrelin release. And so I just felt naturally satiated. And I remember there was a period of time here, and this is really as I was healing from irritable bowel. I would say that the first few months, I was able to get my blood sugar stable. I felt significantly better. I was gaining weight back. And then I kind of found this trick where I would not eat until I actually got hungry. And because I would focus on drinking a gallon of water between the time I woke up right? And roughly, sometime in the early afternoon. Wow. I had this mindset back then, and I don't necessarily teach this now, but it's not a bad practice for some individuals. And I know for me, I do really well when I drink a ton of water throughout the day, and I feel great doing it. And for me, I would drink a gallon of water before I would eat any food. Wow. And by doing that, I just naturally didn't feel hungry. And I still felt real mentally alert, and I would take a little bit of salt with it. And I would start getting hungry around 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. Right. And that's typically when I'd break my fast. And then it was like, that's when my hunger woke up, right? As I broke my fast, and I would eat a whole bunch of food. I mean, I don't know if you have boys, right? Teenage boys or anything, when you're in your early 20s and I was weightlifting and things like that, I would eat a lot of calories. And between let's say 3 o'clock and 8 o'clock, right? And I would just eat a ton of calories during that period of time. And then I would not be hungry. And I actually felt my best during that fasting window. I felt so good. And I was at the top of my class. I was straight A student in graduate school. And part of it was I had these ketones. This is what happens when you fast, right? Is my body became so good at burning fat for fuel that we can't get fatty acids across the blood-brain barrier. So our liver actually converts fatty acids into something called ketones, which are smaller water-soluble molecules that cross the blood-brain barrier, get into the brain. They downregulate brain inflammation. They actually enhance mitochondrial function in the brain. And all that to say that it actually helps us think sharper and clearer, more creative, better resilience, better stress resilience, emotional resilience. And I just felt great, right? And was able to perform at a really high level. And so I was doing that, and I had never heard the term intermittent fasting. I never heard that. I actually thought it was the water. I'd never heard the term. I really didn't know what a ketone was. So even though I was in graduate school studying advanced biochemistry, we didn't really talk about ketones in our bloodstream, right? The only time we actually learned about ketones was something called ketoacidosis, which was a pathophysiological state that somebody with type 1 diabetes might end up getting because if they don't produce insulin, then they can actually, that's why they have to get insulin injections in order to get sugar into the cells to be able to use it as an energy source. Otherwise, they can produce so many ketones that they create this pathology, this disease state called ketoacidosis. So, it's kind of one of the rules. There's always a Goldilocks zone for everything, right? Even things that we say are really good could be bad, right? If there's too much. And so I had never heard those terms. It was just a lifestyle that I was living. And it wasn't until really around the time I opened my clinic, 2009, 2010, that I started hearing the term. In fact, there was a guy, Brad Pilon, that I started following online. This is back in early YouTube days. And he had this program called Eat, Stop, Eat, right? And I was like, wait, I think that's what I do. And it was like, eat till you're satiated, right? Eat as much as you want. And his strategy was don't even think about calories. Just eat until you're fully satiated. He did have a higher protein, kind of real food focus. Mm-hmm. And then you stop, right? And you stop for this, X amount of time. And he would teach a 16-hour fast. And then you eat again. But that was early in the intermittent fasting research was coming out. And that term started becoming more popularized. And I was actually scared to teach it to my patients because I was like, this is what I do, but it kind of seems extreme. So I don't really want to teach it to patients. And I didn't really start teaching it until I would say 2012, 2013. It took me a few years to actually start teaching people, but it was something that I personally was doing and have been doing for years with great success. And so that's really, that's really the story there.
Wow. So is that what you still do basically? Is that kind of still your model, and you fast through till the afternoon and then eat?
Yeah, I do it probably 95% of the time. So I usually break my fast somewhere between 1 o'clock and, I'll eat until 7 or 8, mm-hmm. right? A lot of times, like a day like today, I work out usually around 1 o'clock. So I end up breaking my fast, let's say at 2 o'clock. Okay. And then I usually try to be done eating by 7 o'clock, right? But it just depends on, all the activities and things like that with kids. But that's usually what I'm doing. Every now and then, my wife and I do a breakfast kind of brunch date every other Friday. And she's gotten me to start eating. She's like, I really like it when you eat with me. And so, for my wife, I'll do it. The issue I have is when I eat like a brunch, see, I don't actually get hungry until I start eating. Like that's kind of the way my physiology is like, I don't actually feel hunger until I actually start eating. And then I eat a bunch, right? I'll eat a lot of calories at that point. And so if I eat at, let's say 9:30, 10 o'clock when we're doing this brunch date, normally I like to work out at 1 o'clock and I just don't feel like I can work out. I feel like I'll get nauseous, and so I end up having to push my workout down to like 4:30 or something like that. So it kind of affects what I'm doing with the schedule. But now on those date days, I've kind of rearranged my schedule and everything in order to work out later in the afternoon rather than at the 1 o'clock if I'm eating breakfast with her. But I'm not against eating breakfast. And if you want to eat in the morning, that's great. If that works well for you. For me, something I've been doing a long time. I feel great doing it. If I didn't feel great, I would reassess what I was doing. You know what I mean? I'm not bullish on something if it's not working. I think we need to rethink things. I think fasting is a hormetic stressor. It means that it's a stressor on the body, but it's a stressor that our ancestors all experienced. All of our ancestors, they didn't have pantries and refrigerators and unlimited access to food. So if the hunt wasn't good, if the harvest wasn't good, they had to go periods of time with little to no food, right? And that was just something that we experienced, and our physiology is actually really good at adapting to it. There's all this fear about fasting and things like that in our society today. And some of it is warranted. It is a nuanced conversation, but some of it's just way, way, way overdone. I think that's something in the health world. People just get too into like extremes, and they lack the nuance, the critical thinking to actually say, well, things need to be personalized and customized. And depending on your overall stress load that you're experiencing, exercise that day may not be good. Fasting that day may not be good. Or maybe it'll be amazing for you. Like maybe is exactly what the dose that you need, right? Is this particular type of fast or this particular amount of exercise. And so it's really trying to figure out, where you're at, what your stress levels are, and providing the right dose of hormetic stress to help you become more adaptable, more resilient, and stronger and fitter, right? In general, in life, harder to kill, right? I've heard that term before.
Yeah, absolutely. So you work out right before you break your fast?
That's how I prefer to do it. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I like to work out, and then after my workout, sometimes I'll wait a little bit, but typically I'll break my fast right after that. It's like a nice break in my day.
Sure.
Like a reset. It's almost like I have two, like on a natural working day, I have like two parts of that day. So, I'll work from, let's say 9 to 1 and then work out, right? It's about 30 minutes or so, my workout. And then, have a great, I usually make a protein shake with avocado and raw milk, grass-fed raw milk, and protein powders in there and things like that, berries, frozen berries. Have this great protein shake and then, basically get back to work in a sense, at let's say 2 o'clock, 2:15 or so.
Okay. And so you don't find that performance lags because, working out in a fasted state, that's not a problem.
Yeah, I actually feel better.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually feel better. And one day a week, I will do like a 20 to 24 hour fast. Mm-hmm. And it's usually on Wednesdays. It just depends now with sports schedules and things like that. Sometimes it actually has worked better on Saturdays because we end up so busy running around with all the kids' sports. But for a while there, it was Wednesdays. And I would do a lunch to lunch. That's kind of my favorite way to do a 24-hour fast. I don't like to do dinner to dinner. And there's several reasons I could go into on that. Some people find that it works best for them, but I prefer a lunch to lunch fast. And so I would end up breaking the fast with a workout basically at 1 o'clock on Thursday. And then I would feel amazing. Like I don't notice any lagging performance at all. In fact, I actually feel, to some degree, I feel better. And the reason why is I just feel like during that fasting period, like my mitochondria are just getting more and more efficient. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the great things about fasting is your body starts to break down old damaged mitochondria. That's what produces all your cellular energy. And it breaks those down and then replaces them with new, healthier, more stress resilient mitochondria. And ultimately the quality of our lives, like the amount of physical, mental, even emotional energy and resilience that we have, if we look at it at a cellular level, it's going to come down to the amount of high functioning, stress resilient mitochondria in the cells of our body. And I've been using this term resilience. I think it's important. I think most people kind of have an understanding of that, but what it means is our ability to adapt to stress. So like our body's always trying to find homeostasis or balance. And so anything can be a stressor. Eating too much, eating too little, change in temperature is a big stressor. Having to do some sort of performance or being scared of something, exercise, there's so many different stressors. Of course, we think about all the different emotional stressors, financial pressure, relationship issues, right? All that kind of stuff. And so all of those things pull us out of balance, out of homeostasis. So resilience is how quickly can we get back into a state of calmness, balance, right? In a sense. And the more resilient we are, the better we are at moving away from homeostasis, but then getting back to it, back to this state of balance, the more stress we can handle in a day, right? So we have a greater bandwidth to handle things and still perform at a high level. And so you think about it from like an athlete's perspective, the best athletes, they have to withstand, a tremendous amount of stress and pressure and things like that in order and still perform at a high level. A basketball player's got to be able to hit the free throw or hit the big shot at the end of the game when they're worn down, right? And so it's kind of like that. All of us are occupational athletes, whether we are, a mom, a school teacher, businessman, a podcaster, right? Whatever it is, we are all, in a sense, occupational athletes, right? We have to perform for somebody or something. Mm-hmm. And so we want to have that level of resilience too, where even on a tough day, even when things have been stressful, we're showing up at our best, right? For the people around us and the things that we're doing.
Absolutely. Maybe this is a good time to talk about autophagy and what that is and how fasting promotes that. And then maybe here in a bit, we'll work our way into the protein sparing modified fast.
Yeah. Well, autophagy is basically what I was just explaining, where the body is able to break down these old damage. I mentioned mitochondria. We call that mitophagy. It's a specific autophagy of the mitochondria. And autophagy just means self-eating. So it's interesting how the body works. And so when there's damaged, so basically we're all under this state of oxidative stress. And that is kind of this internal rusting or browning effect. Think about an apple. When you leave it out exposed to oxygen after you take a bite in it, it starts to brown, right? That is oxidation or how metal rusts. Well, this is happening within the cells of our body. And when we have too much oxidation going on, that drives inflammation, right? And of course, inflammation we might start feeling in our body. So we don't feel the oxidation, but over time, too much oxidation results in inflammation, which could result in joint pain. It could result in brain fog. It could result in metabolic dysfunction, right? Thyroid issues where we have low energy, our hair starts thinning and falling out. We can't lose weight. Could result in skin rashes, could result in, any number of things, urinary tract infections, all these different types of things. And so basically what we got to do is have a healthy oxidative stress balance. And so oxidative stress, one of the things it does is it breaks down the proteins, the different organelles, the different organs within the cells of our body. And so our body has a natural cleansing process. So all of us are exposed to oxidation. You're not going to get rid of it, but we should be getting rid of the result, the damage that's done by the oxidation by undergoing this cellular recycling, this autophagy. And so the only way that really gets turned on at a high enough level to make a difference in the cells of our body is the hormone insulin has to go down. And insulin comes out whenever our blood sugar is elevated. And so when is your blood sugar elevated? Typically, we're thinking about when we eat, right? So when we're eating foods, and certain foods are more insulogenic, meaning they promote more insulin release than other foods. Processed foods, for example, processed carbohydrates, all your snacks, your pretzels, chips, cookies, candy, all that stuff. Of course, your drinks, your soft drinks, right? Any sort of like sugar flavored drink is going to spike your blood sugar and your insulin levels, highly insulogenic, right? Also, there's whole food carbs as well that you don't get the spike, right? But you're still going to get an increase in insulin, your fruit, your starchy carbohydrates, of course, breads, all that kind of stuff, the grains, all that's going to elevate your blood sugar and your insulin levels. And so that's fine during a meal, or maybe an hour after the meal or 2 hours after the meal, maybe. But you want to get periods of time. You want to get a good amount of time on a regular basis with insulin low, below a certain critical threshold. And one of the best ways to do that, of course, is obviously removing as much of the ultra processed foods as possible, going on more of a whole, real food based diet. There's a couple other things: eating a high protein, healthy fat, real food based carbohydrate diet is going to help you have more blood sugar stabilization, produce those ketones, keep insulin down. A lot of great benefits there. And then taking longer periods of time between meals, or at least one long period, which is what intermittent fasting does. And so intermittent fasting, like I was talking about, where let's say I finish dinner at 7 p.m. and I don't eat till 1 p.m. the next day, or 2 p.m. It's like an 18 and 19 hour fast. That's a really good period of time to get that insulin down and keep it down for an extended period of time. And while it's down, that's when my body starts, it's like a trigger in the body. As insulin drops below a certain threshold, like just below that line, then the body says, oh, okay, well, now I need to start breaking down stored sugar in my liver and my muscles. We call that glycogen to help fuel the brain. But I also need to start breaking down fat and using that as a fuel source. And I'm going to need some protein. I need some proteins to rebuild white blood cells, to rebuild all the different cellular organelles. And so I'm going to start breaking down. This is what's so interesting about the innate intelligence God put within us, is it knows what areas of the cell are not functioning well. And it will start to break down those proteins and basically recycle them and make new cellular organelles. And that's kind of the cellular refreshing and rejuvenation that takes place during this period of time. But in order for that to happen, we need to have low levels of insulin for a period of time, several hours, in order for that process to start to pick up. And the longer we're going with low insulin, the more of that's going on. Now, of course, we need to eat, obviously, right? And we need insulin as well, right? And so there's a delicate balance between being in a state where we're undergoing this cellular rejuvenation and also having insulin levels, having healthy or higher insulin levels for a short period of time to tell the body we're not in a famine. And so our ancestors would undergo periods of time of what we call feast famine, right? So when the harvest was good, when the hunt was good, they would eat, and they would eat real well, right? And they would have higher amounts of insulin, and that would tell the body, okay, we're in a time of feasting, or food is plentiful. And that's good for promoting hormones associated with fertility, for example, right? Because, that's just a natural trigger to say, hey, this is a healthy environment to bring children into.
Right.
Versus extended times of famine, those hormones start to go down. Those sex hormones that are associated with fertility start going down. Now, we don't want that on a regular basis. We want to have healthy hormones. And this is where the feast famine comes in, where the idea is we eat, and we eat really well when we're eating. Okay. So we eat sufficient calories, but then we also undergo periods of time without eating, where we're also telling the body, okay, now it's time of quote unquote famine, short-term famine. Now we get that cellular rejuvenation, that cellular cleanup. And so what that looks like for each individual can be nuanced. It can be, it's dose dependent in a sense, right? Just like, we shouldn't be giving the same, necessarily the same supplement dose for each individual, or the same, if you're a prescribing physician, you wouldn't want to give the same medication dose for a 300-pound person as you would for, an 80-pound child, right? Right. The dose of that feast famine can look different for each individual, but I think it's something that getting that and triggering autophagy and elevating blood ketones, I think is a critical thing. You almost have to look at it like a nutrient. Right? Just like we need to optimize our vitamin D levels. Okay. We can do that through sun or through supplements. Well, we also need to optimize our autophagy and ketones, right? And make sure we've got enough of that in our system as well to get these desired cellular rejuvenation effects.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are under the impression that you can only achieve autophagy with, something beyond like a 24-hour fast. And I'm like, well, if that's the case, then we would never be self-cleaning. You would never be eating, right? And you could never do it. And so, but what you're saying, and if I'm hearing you correctly and how I understand it, is that, like you said, if you just come below this kind of insulin threshold, you're signaling the body like, this is a time we're not eating. It's cleanup time. It's time, that we can even do that in between meals. If we say we have 4 to 5 hours between meals, we're going to engage in a little bit of that cleanup process. But when we do have that nice long chunk of time, it's going to obviously a more thorough cleansing time without autophagy, correct?
Yeah, 100%. So when people will say stuff like, well, it has to be, a 3-day fast in order to trigger autophagy, it depends on the person's baseline level of insulin sensitivity. So if you were to take the average American where their fasting insulin levels are really high, right? Because they have insulin resistance from eating a high processed food diet, for that person, it might take 3 days to get to the same level of autophagy that for me, a 16-hour fast I get. Right? Because my body's very insulin sensitive. So again, it's about insulin. So when insulin's high, it's blocking autophagy, it's blocking fat burning, right? You're not going to burn fat, you're not going to get the autophagy. For some individuals, it's going to take a long time of fasting, and that's uncomfortable for them because when insulin's high, you don't burn fat. So what are you burning, right? Like, you only had a certain amount of sugar in your system for a period of time. So those are the people that can often really struggle with an extended fast too. This is why I don't recommend somebody who's very overweight, very insulin resistant, immediately go into a fast. They could. It's kind of like somebody going out and running, a 10K, right? When they've never exercised, right? They could do it, but they're going to be really sore. Yeah. They're not going to feel good. It's not going to be the great experience rather than building up kind of a baseline level of fitness and then going out and doing that. And so that's typically the way, the best approach to it. And so it's going to be, again, dose dependent on the individual based on where their insulin sensitivity is.
Sure. And I think, intermittent fasting is a nice stair stepper to somebody that is wanting to do maybe a longer 24-hour fast, work your way up with your intermittent fast and then get there. Well, let's talk about protein sparing modified fast. I'm so intrigued by this strategy. So tell us what it is and then just talk about how we go about it and why it's good and who it's good for.
Yeah, for sure. Well, protein sparing modified fast is a form of a partial fast. And so, of course, fasting just means going without, right? And so, typically, when people are doing more extended fasting, let's say 3 or 5 day fasts or 7-day fasts, they're doing a water fast or water fast, maybe with salt. But obviously the compliance level is really low. It's, you got to have a high level of motivation. You got to push through a lot of uncomfortability to do that. Protein sparing modified fast is a great approach for a lot of people because you can, especially if your goal is to lose weight, right? You can really lose weight doing this and it helps quench satiety. Most of the people that go through this don't feel as hungry. They don't have cravings, things like that. And that's because you're sparing the protein in a sense, right? You're fasting more so from the carbs and the fat and eating a high protein diet. So roughly, they say basically around 40%, a typical partial fast is about 40% or so of the total, your total calories that you would normally eat. So the average individual is eating around 2,000 calories, 2,000 to 2,500. So with the protein sparing modified fast, it's roughly 800 to 1,000 calories a day. And you're eating a high protein diet, right? So you're eating roughly 125 to 150 grams of protein in that day. And so there's 4 calories per gram of protein. So 150 times 4 is roughly 600 calories of protein. And then you're keeping your net carbs. So fiber, we're not counting here. It's your total carbs minus fiber. And we're keeping that to under 30 grams a day. And then we're also keeping your total fat to under 30 grams a day. Now, I don't typically recommend this long-term because very low fat diets like that, you can end up having, fat soluble nutrient deficiencies, things like that. So I don't think it's a great long-term plan, but it's something that you can implement. You can either use it like, I know a lot of people use it 1 day a week or 2 days a week, or they'll do, like a 7 to 14 day protein sparing modified fast in order to drop 10, 15 pounds, right? And there's people that are able to do that. The great thing about the protein, again, is it stops the cravings, hunger, and protein itself actually helps keep your metabolism firing high because there's a thermogenic effect of breaking down protein that you end up expending more calories in order to process it into nutrients that you can use. And then on top of that, in order to break it into amino acids, basically. And then on top of that, it helps preserve lean body tissue, right? And you can work out during this. And so like typically if somebody's doing a 7-day fast, water fast, I'm not going to have them work out. I'll have them walk, right? But I'm not going to have them do strength training. With this, you can still do strength training and not lose muscle mass. And your body will just go in and break down body fat. And so that's kind of the benefit of this protein sparing modified fast. So you can do it with 2 or 3 meals a day. I either recommend 2 or 3. Depends on what you're used to. If you're somebody that's used to eating 2 meals a day, then I would say just continue with that, right? Continue. Let's say you eat a meal at 12 and you eat a meal at 6, right? You continue with that and you focus on basically you're getting 60 to 75 grams of protein in each of those meals. And you're getting roughly 10 to 15 grams of net carbs and 10 to 15 grams of fat in each of those meals. If you're doing 3 meals a day, like a breakfast, lunch, dinner kind of thing, then you just break it up, to where you're getting basically 40 to 50 grams of protein in each of those meals, 8 to 10 grams of net carbs, 8 to 10 grams of fat in those meals. And I would say the hardest thing about the protein sparing modified fast for the people that are doing it is actually getting the protein without the fat. Because, your healthy whole food proteins typically have a good amount of healthy fats, the way God designed it. And so it's like you have to, like eggs, for example, right? You've got to do egg whites, which, notoriously I hate that idea because the yolk is when
that's not
all the
nutrients.
I know it's where all the fat soluble nutrients and things like that are. But I mean, if you're going to follow that plan, you can't get all that fat that's in there. Hopefully somebody in your family will enjoy it, maybe an animal, right? Or something like that. So you're not just throwing out those yolks. And then, like chicken breast, of course. And you think about a bodybuilder's diet, particularly as bodybuilders typically go through multiple stages where they're trying to bulk up. And then all of a sudden they get really lean, and they basically do this protein sparing modified fast for a month before their competition. And that gets them really lean and they'll drop, 15% body fat, right? In some cases, right? 10% body fat in the course of that month. Now they won't feel great, but they're also doing excessive training and whatnot for this. And so they're high level athletes. You can actually do this and feel really good if you do it right. And so, basically that's how I broke it down was, that's how you would do it. So you're doing chicken breast, you're doing lean pieces of protein. I've heard, Vanessa Spina is a friend of mine. She has a optimal protein podcast and she was telling me she's very lean too. I've actually never done this because for me, I'm always trying to maintain my weight. So I personally have never done it. I've just heard from a lot of people that have done this. And she was telling me she's also very lean, that she feels really good with it. She's able to continue to train and she'll actually take ground beef, right? Cook it and then she'll drain it, right? And she'll help will help pull out as much of the fat as possible. And so that's one way she's able to get red meat into her diet during this because red meat obviously is a more fatty cut of meat. Right. So that's how she does it. She does things like shrimp and stuff like that. She does a lot of fish. She did a lot of white fish, especially because that's lower in fat. So those are some of the key things. And then of course you can do some vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, salads without dressing or maybe like a lemon juice dressing. And, you can do your cruciferous vegetables, asparagus, broccoli, kale, collard greens, things like that. You can do all of that as well.
It's such a different frame of mind when because most of us are in a lower carb, we kind of maintain a lower carb diet and a higher fat diet. So to think of taking out the fats, it sounds so boring and it just really makes you appreciate the joy and the flavor and the taste of fat because the primary foods you would eat in this protein sparing modified fast, but egg whites, chicken, like you said, the fish, like a low fat, yogurt or cottage cheese, but you'd even have to be, kind of careful with that. And that is something I don't ever recommend anybody.
I'm like fat-free Greek yogurt. Yep.
Yeah, something like that. I'm like, God did not make cows with low fat udders, y'all. So I'm always recommending the full fat. But in this case, this would be the case for it. And like you said, I think one of the biggest critiques of fasting for a lot of people is that, it's breaking down muscle. And so this is just a nice solution for that, for people that want to do a longer fast. But like you said, also helps keep some of that satiety level up. And it's just a really good strategy. Is there a difference?
And real quick, I want to address that. People say, fasting breaks down muscle. And I would say actually that it's not the fasting that breaks down muscle, because when you fast, your insulin goes down. When insulin goes down, you have this counteractive hormone called growth hormone that elevates, right? So growth hormone is your quintessential anti-aging hormone. It helps to preserve lean body tissue. So muscle, bone, it tells your body, hold on to that muscle, hold on to that bone, helps turn up fat burning. It helps to repair collagen tissue. So you have better skin, hair, nails, all of that. It's the anti-aging hormone. People spend thousands of dollars to get growth hormone injections for anti-aging. Your body produces a lot of it when insulin is down, particularly at night when you're sleeping, which is one of the reasons why I like the lunch to lunch fast. You get more growth hormone release at night. And so growth hormone will preserve the lean body tissue. However, if you're doing an extended fast, you stop training. And what the muscle tissue needs is, of course, it does need nutrients, but it also needs an anabolic environment. The anabolic environment, actually, growth hormone is a part of that anabolic environment. And then it also needs mechanical stress. So we actually need that mechanical loading in order to basically maintain muscle. And some people lose muscle faster than others. My body type, it's super easy for me to run long distances. Like I could just never train, get out and just run a long distance. But it's harder for me to maintain muscle mass. And so I need good amount of mechanical, like I need to lift heavy weights on a regular basis to maintain my muscle mass. There's other people, like for example, my chiropractor that I see out here, this guy just looks at a weight and he's like, ripped. He was a bodybuilder, right? It's like he needs very little training and he puts on muscle. But he can't run long distance. You know what I mean? Like he tires out really quick. And so there's unique body types. But it's not the actual fasting that causes us to lose the muscle tissue. It's actually just probably not training hard. We're not giving the mechanical stress. I mean, I don't recommend, training intensely if you're doing a 5 or 7 day fast. You know what I mean? And so that lack of training will cause you to lose that muscle.
Okay, good. Thanks for clearing that up. What about, is there a difference for men or women doing this as far as how much protein or, carbs, or we kind of keep that about the same?
Yeah, it's really roughly about the same. Typically for women, usually you're doing more of the 800 calories, right? So there's kind of two modifications for it, 800 to 1000 calories. But a woman who's very active, maybe doing a lot of training during that period of time, can go up to 1000 calories and still get great results.
Okay. What about gluconeogenesis? If we're eating all this protein, we're keeping our carbs and our fat low. Does that play into this in any way?
Yes. So gluconeogenesis just means basically creating glucose out of non-glucose sources. And so the body can create glucose out of all kinds of things, amino acids. It can create it out of fatty acids, right? The glycerol backbone. So basically you're more or less, your body's going to do whatever it can to keep your blood sugar nice and stable. Okay. And so that's just a normal homeostatic mechanism, right? And we don't really need to worry about that. The protein sparing modified fast will get you into ketosis for sure. You can measure that if you want, but your body has to be able to burn a good amount of fat during that period of time. And of course, like I said, you can't get the brain, the neurons can run, they need sugar. So they need glucose, which is why we undergo gluconeogenesis to preserve the brain. But the brain actually, 10% of our metabolic rate is taken up in the brain because they're so mitochondrial dense, the neurons. So the brain needs a continual supply of glucose, but also if we're not consuming a very low carb and a calorie restricted diet like this, it's not going to get enough. So this is why it has to turn the fat into ketones And those ketones can supply the other 50% of the neuron's energy needs. And those ketones also act as what we call epigenetic modulators, where they actually have a really positive effect on the genetic expression of the neurons. So those neurons will actually be able to function better. We talked about mitochondrial function, right? Autophagy there, mitochondrial biogenesis as well, where we form more healthy mitochondria in the brain. Also, ketones actually help to balance the glutamate to GABA ratio in the brain. So glutamate is our excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. So it helps us think sharply and quickly. Think about it like a gas pedal when you're driving a car. GABA is the brakes. It helps us be calm, right? To be able to focus on one thing, have good focus. It helps us to be relaxed, right? We need a balance of both, right? We don't want too much of either. When people are inflamed, when they have chronic inflammation, we get excess excitatory activity in the brain. This means too much glutamate. And that excess excitation, too much excitation, actually ends up causing neurons to die. We call this neuroexcitotoxicity, this physiological mechanism. It's almost like dominoes. One cell gets overly excited to the point where it dies, and then it spills out its chemical content, right? And that then poisons the next neuron next to it and next to it. And it's like a domino effect going down. So ketones actually come in and they help to balance that glutamate to GABA ratio, which helps us think sharply and quickly, but also have the calmness. So we're able to have just better function, again, we talked about resilience, right? Yeah. We want to be able to react quickly and think sharply and quickly, but we don't want too much anxiety, right? We don't want to get too irritable, right? You have kids, right? So it's like, right? It's real quick, we don't want to be too quick to anger in our relationships, right? It's biblical principles, right? And so having a healthy glutamate to GABA ratio helps us to be more calm, relaxed, but also be able to be a critical thinker as well. So we want to have that ratio, and that's what the ketones help with. And so this is why so many people that are doing either a protein sparing modified fast or, any sort of partial fast, a bone broth fast, green juice fast, even in some cases, the Daniel fast, if you're under eating on calories, you're going to get some ketone production, right? Or doing intermittent fasting. They feel like a lot more calm, relaxed. And that's why is that glutamate to GABA ratio. And so anyways, I think whenever we're talking about fasting, we should always go into brain health effects, right?
Yes,
so, yeah,
absolutely. And, when we just think of biblical fasting, spiritual fasting, and how it all works together on a physical level, a mental level, and then a spiritual level, because I do feel like that opening, that clearing of the mind just is what helps us make us more receptive to hearing the Lord and tuning into what he would have for us. So, of course, he would make.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it definitely, you can explain it from a physiological perspective, because there's lots of people from all walks of life that have noticed, breakthroughs when they undergo this fast. Now, I think from a biblical perspective, we are saying more of you, God, less of me, right? And so I'm denying the desires of the flesh. That's what we're doing as Christians from a biblical perspective, right? And then we're getting all these other great benefits, for our physical body, right? But of course, there's people out there that, are of different faiths that have said, oh, I just noticed that I had this, more remarkable intuition and this creativity. And I think, even people of all faith, I think it's just a physiological mechanism that takes place when we have that really calm brain with minimal, and you think about like a radio station with no feedback. Like it's like you can hear it perfectly.
Yeah.
Most of us are walking around on a day-to-day basis with lots of static. We're trying to get the radio station tuned in, but it's like we can barely get it. None of us use radios anymore, but back in the day, it's like we would try to get that just right. And it was like, oh, I can hear it now. And then all of a sudden it would tune out. And so it's kind of like that. That's what most people are walking around with, that going on in their brain. And when we fast, we get we're tuning in just right. And so we're getting the right message, and that can result in breakthroughs, right? Creative breakthroughs, better memory, recalling, different things, learning at a higher level. So there's so many great benefits to it.
Absolutely. Let's circle back real quick to autophagy and how that works with a protein sparing modified fast. Because one thing we, talk about a lot in the holistic health world is, and when it comes to fasting, is how amino acids will break that autophagy, kind of signal that off. So how does that all work together?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I taught for years as well. And I'm an advocate of the Prolon 5-day fasting mimicking diet. And what they do is they have a low protein approach, right? And so it's like basically 10% of the calories, and they have all their foods in a box. You can buy this 5-day fasting mimicking diet. And so that's what most of us thought. However, there's new research out actually that's showing that may not be the case. Now, in a normal caloric diet or a hypercaloric diet where you're eating more than what your body needs, or you're eating the normal amount that your body needs, then the higher amounts of protein and amino acids will stimulate the mTOR pathway, which is associated with building and growth. It's the opposite of the AMPK pathway, which is associated with autophagy. And so I'm still a big advocate of a high protein diet because we need activation of mTOR, right? I think that's super important. Where the protein sparing modified fast comes in is the fact that it is low calorie. That you're in a pretty significant caloric deficit. So because of that, you're not stimulating mTOR enough to block autophagy. And that's really kind of where the magic happens there. In fact, there was research. This is Clinical Nutrition, August 2025. It just came out in Clinical Nutrition. It was done at the School of Life Sciences at the University of Nottingham in the UK. And the title of this, you can look it up if you haven't seen it, Effects of Fasting Mimicking Diets with Low and High Protein Content on Cardiometabolic Health and Autophagy. It was a randomized parallel group study for 7 days. So they had a low protein group that consumed 850 calories. So remember, we talked about 800 to 1,000 calories. So the low protein group was basically doing the Prolon 5-day fasting mimicking diet, more or less. I don't know if that's exactly what they were doing, but the macronutrients were pretty similar. 45% fat, 10% protein. So roughly about 21 grams of protein a day. And then the high protein group was doing the same amount of calories, 850 calories. They were doing 25% fat, 30% protein. So roughly 64 grams of protein. So when I teach a fasting mimicking diet, the protein sparing modified fast, I'm teaching a lot more protein than that. But that amount of protein, according to the Prolon and the fasting mimicking diet group, they would say that's too much. You're going to stimulate mTOR, and that nutrient sensing pathway is going to stop autophagy. However, in this study, what they found was that both groups, the low protein and high protein group, reduced body weight and fat mass, but only the high protein fasting mimicking diet reduced visceral fat mass relative to the control group. So they had 16 people in a control group that, were just basically following their normal diet, 15 in low protein, 15 in high protein. So the high protein group reduced visceral fat. Okay. So that was important. Both of the fasting mimicking diets reduced their plasma glucose by 10% relative to the control. So both had a drop in blood sugar. And the increase in ketones was higher in the low protein, right? So ketones were elevated more in the low protein group. But again, there was this reduction in visceral fat in the high protein group. And then also the heart rate variability, which is kind of a sign of stress resilience, as well as the gut microbiome diversity and the circulating triglycerides and saturated fatty acids were improved only in the high protein group, right? So they saw improvements in the heart rate variability, gut microbiome diversity, which is a sign of a more resilient gut. Circulating triglycerides, that's something we want to get down, your triglycerides, because that tells us basically your body's good at burning fat for fuel. And then both fasting mimicking diets induced autophagy at the molecular level. So that was key. The conclusion said both of the groups promoted cardiometabolic health and induction of autophagy, with the high protein group conferring novel benefits in body comp, circulating lipid profiles, heart rate variability, and gut microbiome health. So it's interesting. Obviously, that was only 46 people in that study. So, we should do longer studies, but that contradicts that idea that you don't get autophagy on a higher protein, calorie restricted diet. So that's the key there, right? High protein, calorie restricted diet. And that was able to induce that autophagy.
Oh, I love it. I'm a kind of a fan of using, essential amino acid supplementation, and a lot of people that I work with are. And so that would mean even if you are taking your essential amino acid supplementation in a fasted state, that's not necessarily knocking out your autophagy.
Correct. Yeah. We don't know enough, maybe it's reducing it a little bit, but we don't know enough. But obviously based on this study here, it's telling us that you can do this 7-day. It's a calorie restricted state, right? So again, that's kind of where the key there is the fact that that these people were in a calorie restricted state. But with that said, people that are following a higher protein diet in general, again, you can exercise more, right? So when you're doing the fasting mimicking diet, they don't recommend the prolonged 5-day fasting mimicking diet. You're not getting the protein. So we don't recommend resistance training during that period of time. Whereas I know a lot of people that have done the protein sparing modified fast that continue to weight train and they feel great during their workouts.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. I'm glad we talked about that study. That is really interesting and it opens up a lot of doors. But yeah, I think it is the low calorie, like you said, is the key, and that is what is supporting the autophagy. So I like for people to hear that. It's not just about fasting that's supporting autophagy. Low calorie is kind of part of that, but exercising, there's those other factors that really help support.
Yeah, for sure. And really things that help keep your insulin levels stable. So you're gonna undergo autophagy and higher fat burning when your insulin levels get below a certain threshold. Now, we don't have that mapped out as far as what that threshold is. In functional medicine, when we do a fasting insulin test, so somebody does a 12 to 14 hour overnight fast. Maybe they finish dinner at, let's say, 7 p.m. and they get their blood drawn at 8 a.m. the next day. We want to see that under 6, right? And so there's hypothesis that perhaps, that under 6 is kind of the place where, your body starts really undergoing more fat burning, right? Perhaps autophagy starts getting stimulated. And so for some individuals, it can, I have very good insulin sensitivity. So after a big meal, my fasting insulin will drop under 6 within 8 hours, right? For somebody else, it might take 2 days, right, to get it under there, 3 days, 5 days in some cases, right? For others, it might take 24 hours to get under, a certain amount. And so really things that help improve your insulin sensitivity, where your body doesn't have to produce a lot of insulin when you eat food, that is going to help your autophagy. So good sleep, we know, plays a big role with that. The better you sleep, the better your insulin sensitivity. Regular exercise, good movement throughout the day. So I always say there's a difference between movement and exercise. Movement is going out, taking a walk, right? Just getting regular movement, walking around your house. Exercise would be something higher intensity, getting your heart rate up. So it could be, running intervals, or it could be strength training, weight training. So doing a combination of both of those things. Sauna has been shown to improve insulin sensitivity. Getting in a sauna, getting in a cold plunge has actually been shown, or doing a cold, 30-second cold shower at the end of your shower has been shown to improve. Supplements like berberine, drinking green tea, drinking coffee for some individuals, or for most individuals actually, coffee has been shown to help improve blood sugar. Of course, there's some people that are very slow caffeine metabolizers and either need a reduced dose of coffee or no coffee, right? And you want to get the right type of coffee. You want to get mold-free, because that could trigger you. But there are different types of herbal teas can be really beneficial. Apple cider vinegar is amazing. The acetic acid in there helps feed the mitochondria, in your gut. And that helps to basically improve your fat burning. And so improves your microbiome. So taking apple cider vinegar before a meal has been shown to improve the glycemic impact. Or if you don't do apple cider vinegar, lemon or lime juice can be beneficial. Eating protein first in a meal. So if you have a meal, like one of my favorite meals, I know you were going to ask about this. So one of my favorite meals, is I like to have grass-fed burger, with no bun or anything like that. cheeseburger oftentimes, and sweet potato. I really enjoy sweet potato. My kids love it. And a Mediterranean salad that I like to make with like cucumbers, tomatoes, lots of high polyphenol, extra virgin olive oil, feta cheese, and lemon juice, and then like herbs and salt and stuff like that on it. And so if I'm going to eat that meal, what is going to have the biggest impact on my insulin? Well, it's going to be the sweet potato. It's going to be the starch, right? So what you want to do there is I'll eat my burger. I'll eat my protein first. And sometimes I'll eat a lot of my salad first before I eat the sweet potato. And just prioritizing protein or fiber before something that is more insulinogenic will lower the glycemic impact of the meal and the insulin impact of the meal. And so just doing it in order like that can be helpful. Or even moving right before your meal. Maybe, especially if you're going to have a higher amount of carbohydrates in a meal, doing something like 10 air squats, 20 air squat, just squats without any weight, just right there, right before you eat, will actually help to activate your GLUT4 protein transporter in your cells and lower the need for insulin from that meal. So lots of different things that can be discussed.
Yeah, those are such good tips. I love that. Awesome. Well, yeah, you kind of beat me to the punch on the anchor meal. So yeah, I think that would be your anchor meal. And I love that. That's
and my favorite dessert actually is I'll get full fat Greek yogurt. I'll throw in some, I get this MCT oil powder, collagen in there, right? And it's flavored with stevia. I'll mix that in there. And then I love pomegranate. Of course, you got to peel the pomegranate and everything. So I do berries a lot, but my favorite is pomegranate seeds with the yogurt and the MCT / collagen stevia flavored protein. Tastes awesome. Great little dessert.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, well then how about an anchor verse, which is your favorite Bible verse, life verse, one that's resonating with you presently?
Yeah, my favorite verse is Romans 8:28, and God will work all things out for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And I think that's a great resilience, scripture, because it's like sometimes it doesn't look like things are going to work out for good. And, in our limited sense, oftentimes we are quick to judge things as this is really bad. This is not good. And so I feel like it just helps me reset to more of a heavenly perspective that God can see. Time doesn't restrict God, right? Whereas it does for me. And so something may not look good now, but God can make beauty out of ashes and he'll work all things out for good. So I just need to have hope and faith in that, continue to put my best foot forward, and God's going to work all things out for good.
Amen to that. This has been awesome, Dr. Jockers. Thank you so much. How can people best connect with you and find all of your information?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Chelsea. I appreciate the conversation. And you can reach me, drjockers.com. And of course, Dr. David Jockers on social media, YouTube, podcast, Dr. Jockers Functional Nutrition Podcast. So you can reach out to me anywhere on there.
Awesome. And we will link to your resources, and you have a podcast on protein sparing modified fast, and I have a guide as well. So we'll link all to that all in the show notes. And surely between all of that, somebody can get started and try that if they want to give it a whirl. Thanks again for being here. And thank you everybody for listening. I hope you have a healthy and blessed week, and I will talk to you soon.
Hi everyone, remember that my mom is an awesome nutritionist, but she's not a doctor. The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. Always talk to your doctor before making changes to your nutrition or exercise program. Thanks for listening. Have a healthy and blessed week.